to the Active Travel Adventures podcast. I'm your host, Kit Parks, and today we are doing the Sophie Diaries. On the third Thursday of each month, while I'm on my extended camper van road trip across the United States in Sophie Girl, my converted Sprinter van, I tell you a little bit about the places I'm going to see, what I'm seeing, what I'm learning, the mistakes I've made, so hopefully you won't make them when you get out on the road. And I hope to kind of impart what I'm finding out about this great country of ours, especially during this crazy time of the waning, hopefully weeks or months of COVID. Where we left off last month, I was in New Mexico heading to Flagstaff. So with that, let's get started. Last night, I decided to stay at a truck stop again, although I didn't realize until I'd settled in that this one had a sign saying 1 hour limit. Westbound civilization was a long way away, so I decided to take my chances that the rule wasn't being strictly enforced. I guessed correctly that the kids managing the register could care less. There was a ruckus just before midnight that I think was just night driving desert dune buggying, and a dozen or so had loudly come through the gas station earlier, and this group definitely seemed like they'd had a few. I was really hoping that I didn't get kicked out because I sure didn't want to be on the road with this gang. After they left, the night was blissfully quiet, and I slept soundly till around 5 a.m. Refreshed, I grabbed some coffee and hit the road. I did top up with gas as a way to say thanks, and then I headed west. It's hard to believe that I'm on a road that I could have picked up less than 2 hours from my house, and it would take me all the way to the Pacific Ocean. In fact, as I neared Flagstaff, the interstate signs now indicated which way to turn to get to Los Angeles. I am just under 2,000 miles from eastern North Carolina, where I started, even though I have so far zigzagged about 4,000 miles in the last couple of weeks. I don't like driving this much and prefer to stay at places at least a couple of days, but I've been under the gun to make it to Sedona by April 6th. Plus, I wanted to catch Jenny before she ironically went to North Carolina to visit her mother. Jenny's the gal that we interviewed for the Flagstaff episode. It was wonderful to meet her in person. I'll put a link in the show notes. This morning, I crossed the Continental Divide, which I guess correctly should be called the Western Continental Divide because it wasn't too long ago that I crossed the eastern one. Because my end goal was in sight, I would reach Flagstaff by mid-morning. I ended up bypassing the Petrified Forest National Park, and it wasn't too far off the interstate, but frankly, I wasn't interested in adding any more miles to the day, and I wanted to try to get one of the first campsites before they're all sold out this Easter weekend. About 55 miles east of Flagstaff, I had to rub my eyes. Up ahead, piercing the sky behind miles and miles of desert mesas, was a very tall snow-capped mountain. It seemed so out of place in this adobe-colored desert. I also started seeing dinosaur figures along the highway as I neared Meteor Crater. This is a private exhibit that features a 1,400-pound meteorite, thus explaining all the dinosaurs I was seeing and trying to tie in their extinction. One odd thing I noticed is that the colorfully decorated crosses along the road became simple crosses once again in Arizona. So maybe I was wrong about the Mexican Americans decorating their loved ones' crosses, or else in Arizona they don't follow the same traditions. I'm not real sure, but it definitely was noticeable. The landscapes are beginning to change once again. For a while, the brownish tan rock and soil had a red tint, but that's now reverted to tan. And I'm starting to go up again. I see several signs indicating when I'm at 5,000 feet, 6,000 foot elevation above sea level. Then the vegetation changes dramatically. Pine trees are back and big time. I'm entering the world's largest Ponderosa pine forest. I also see warning signs I need to watch out for elk as well. As I get nearer and nearer to the snow-capped mountains, the tallest of which, and Arizona's tallest mountain, I learn is called Humphreys Peak at 12,633 feet. In Arizona, who knew? And I'm reminded that that was what Jenny was trying to explain to us all in the episode about her hometown. As I enter the town, I immediately like it and its architecture. It's got this nice chill vibe, which I like as well. My plan to snag a campsite at the ranger's office turned out to be a bust. I had beelined for the Cococino National Forest Ranger's office to try to get a site, but they were closed due to COVID. So I picked up a forest map that they'd left outside, but also called the ranger's number. You had to book 3 days in advance, so last minute was not going to be an option. I think this is a COVID rule, but I wouldn't be surprised if they maintain it afterwards. I'm finding that the COVID rules are so different every state I go to, and I can't keep up. I generally just try to find out what the rule is when I can't do something I want to do. Like I wanted to shower in New Mexico. Gyms were open, but the showers were closed. Truck stops were allowed to offer the showers, but the gyms weren't. Go figure. It seems like there's more likely transmission from an assortment of out-of-staters at a truck stop than at a local gym, but what do I know? So studying the map and knowing that I'm going to see Jenny tomorrow, I now look for dispersed camping areas in this vast 1.8 million acre forest somewhere close to where she lives, and I pick an area. As I climb the mountains from Flagstaff Valley, I notice that a lot of the side roads are closed, as is the one I had chosen to go to. Correctly figuring that this is due to snowmelt causing muddy roads they don't want to tear up, I figured that the higher up I go, the less likely that these side forest roads are going to be open, so I turn around and head back down to Flagstaff and decide to call the ranger to find out exactly where I can camp. The nearest spot is a long way away, so I decide to wait for another day. Jenny is free, so we just decided on a local hike near her beautiful neighborhood in the same forest. She can see the peaks from her neighborhood. It was really lovely. We have a nice afternoon getting to know each other better and plan to do a more serious hike in the morning. We meet up the next morning, and I've asked her to choose a hike that can test me. I want to see if I'm in shape enough for my Sedona hike, not that I have much time left to prepare. Jenny knows these mountains well and chooses a path away from the crowds. We only see one other hiker all morning. It's nice hiking with a local. Jenny points out all the horned toads and their native squirrels that have these really long bunny ears. I hate squirrels, but even I have to admit these guys are cute. We also see a lot of woodpeckers, and a pair of blue jays are announcing our presence to the rest of the forest. At the top of our hike, there's a nice grouping of large rocks where we sit to eat our lunch and have a panoramic view of Flagstaff down below. It was a lovely hike. Jenny's got a house guest arriving, so we part ways after lunch, but she's invited me to dinner, which I readily agreed to. It'll be a treat to spend more time with her and her family, and I'll get a nice hot meal instead of my normal salad. Jenny and her husband Paul are a Renaissance couple. They know a lot about all sorts of subjects and also take time to add quality to their lives. I sample delicious homemade bread loaded with pepitas, the pumpkin seeds. We make our own pasta for dinner, and Jenny and her son Steve whip up a fabulous and healthy bechamel sauce and salad. Paul brews his own beer and wine. The dark ale is fantastic, and even though I generally don't like dark ales. I'm a convert now. With dinner we have his number 7, a fabulous and complex cab. It's hard to believe that this is only Paul's 7th wine he's made. I think maybe it's because he's a scientist that he's cracked the code so quickly. It's been a great day, and I have a lovely time getting to know Jenny and her family better. She's going on my Croatia bike and boat tour this fall, so we'll have a lot more time together then. Meeting active people like Jenny inspires me. At 60, she's as fit as can be. She hikes, she mountain bikes, she goes up real hills, unlike my so far pansy rides. She also does long-distance paddle trips. Maybe I can get her to come on the show and tell us about those. She and Paul have also traveled the world, so have lots of fun stories to share. From Flagstaff, I take the scenic drive to the Red Rock of Sedona. It's no wonder some people claim Sedona is the prettiest town on the planet. The cool downtown is surrounded by towering red rock formations, one more incredible than the next. But it's a beauty that's also made the town a crowded and over-touristed place. I specifically chose to drive through on an early Sunday morning in hopes of avoiding the crowds. The downtown is just tourist shops and restaurants, so I just do a quick drive-through. My main interest is hiking in these incredible canyons in just a few days. I did a whole show on my Sedona 4-day base camp hiking trip with Wildland Trekking, and I'll put a link in the show notes. But until my Sedona hiking tour, I'll camp in the Prescott Forest. I'm early for my check-in at my campsite, but the previous campers have left, so I set up camp. It's hot. In fact, it's too hot to head out hiking this afternoon, so I decided I'll just clean Sophie out, and while I'm at it, pare down the guidebooks and the huge bag of travel clippings I brought along. I didn't have time to organize all these before I moved to Sophie, so now today's the day. I go through a dozen park books, rails to trails, paddle and road trip books, and make notes of the places I want to check out. I can get the rest of the information online, but these books have done a pre-screening for me. Then I tackle the clippings, which I've already tossed about 75% before I even headed out. Now I'm making notes by state and country of the different places, trails, and adventures that have enticed me enough to clip them. These are now organized by destination so that when I plan to go to a new state or country, I have an easy cheat sheet to narrow down the things I want to see and do. I feel very proud of myself and wish I'd simply started with this system to begin with. To fight the blazing sun, even though I'm sleeping in Sophie, I set up my beloved pop-up screen porch. Sadly, I doubt it's going to make it through the summer. I stake it down, but it looks not so good. Then I attached a tarp to it because there aren't enough high shade trees here to simply make a tarp shade. And I have just enough shade to get some work done. I know the whole setup looks ridiculous, but I don't care. I'm out of the sun and I'm comfortable. Up by the bathrooms, I post a sign, free books and merchandise, all my guidebooks, so that people coming to the bathroom would have a chance to take some of these back home with them. I've gotten rid of a boxload of books and I'm thrilled. In the morning, I get up early to hit the trail before it gets too hot. Even though I'm around 5,000 feet, it still gets hot in the afternoon. But since I'm in the high desert, by late afternoon, it starts cooling down nicely. There's a lake down below, and I find the trail leading to it. It turns out I was supposed to download the forest map before I got here, but I didn't, because I didn't know. And there are no maps to be had. Fortunately, by the lake, there is a picture of the trails, so I snap a photo, and that gives me the confidence to veer off the lake trail to get back up into the mountain. Gratefully, the intersections of the trails are well marked by number. I'm mostly in Ponderosa pine forest, but I see they're trying to encourage more of the understory trees and vegetation. I can tell this by several of the interpretive signs. This is better for both the wildlife, and the diversity also decreases major forest fires. It's hoped that the normal small understory fires that naturally occur or are prescribed burns will reinforce this. I stopped for a snack by the lake on one of the many benches donors have provided throughout the forest. My latest favorite is a whole wheat tortilla spread with both peanut butter and Nutella. Yum! Raisins, bananas, or other chopped dried fruit would also be a nice addition to the wrap. I'm trying to drink a ton of water, but in this arid climate, it seems impossible. Your sweat whisks away, so you have to constantly drink water to replenish your body. I make a major dent in my water bladder stock, but I still have dry mouth. I need to check out Grand Canyon Mary's tip about sucking on Jolly Roger candies to see if that helps. The dry air has also affected my dry skin. My poor cuticles are shredded with hangnails. It's amazing to me how quickly a different environment affects our bodies. I had a wonderful trip in Sedona, and again, I encourage you to listen to that episode if you have not, where I cover that more in depth. But when I get back, I head back to the Flagstaff area and head to Sunset Crater. I know I can be clumsy, but I rarely hurt myself. Today, just 3 weeks since I had that bad fall on my bicycle up in Virginia and hurt my left shoulder, I managed a trip at Sunset Crater National Monument. I was studying a lizard instead of the trail, and this was a pretty wide, level trail, but it was embedded with some lava rocks periodically, and because of that, I was using my sticks for most of the hike because I noticed that my shoes were catching on these stones. But as I got close to the trailhead and I could see Sophie, I started carrying my sticks, and that's when I saw the lizard. I had nothing to break my fall except my arms, and my right elbow landed on one of the border lava rocks, which was extremely sharp. It hurt, of course, but my shirt surprisingly wasn't torn. But then it started bleeding profusely. Even though I had an emergency kit in my pack, since I was so close to my better supplies in the van, I decided to wait until I reached there. What a mess. Once I cleaned it up, I could see that it wasn't long, maybe only an inch and a half long, but it was pretty deep. Fortunately, the blood stopped within 10 minutes so I could get a better look. And I was deciding whether or not it needed stitches. I don't think I've ever had stitches from an accident before, except one time on my head as a child playing in a playground accident. I've never broken anything, and I've only been in urgent care a couple of times, usually for bizarre things, like when I was cleaning up some debris in the yard and a branch punctured my inner ear. I was thinking maybe those butterfly band-aids that you can buy might close the wound up. When I couldn't find them, the pharmacist tried to help me, and then she also looked at my cut and said, "Nah, I needed stitches," and referred me to Next Care in Flagstaff. I'm glad I went, because the doctor told me that elbow injuries are more susceptible to infection, plus he wanted to give me a tetanus shot. And since I was a fool as a child and never got that memo on taking the full course of antibiotics, I tend to have some resistance to them, so I really try to avoid infections. He numbed it up and scrubbed it really well, about 100 times better than I did, and put a few stitches in. For the next couple of days, I wish somebody had taken a video of me trying to put my mask on. Neither of my arms was competent because the left was still hurting from the bike injury and the right had the elbow injury. So I would have to do this like bobbing for apples, trying to get my hands to get the mask on top of my ears. Even I found it ridiculous. I was reminded how sometimes it's not the smartest thing to do the kinds of activities that I do solo. Sometimes things go wrong, and I'm often in remote areas away from other people who could possibly provide help. And many times nobody on the planet even knows where I am. I resolved to be more careful. Since my plan was to be out in the desert for the next week, with Paige my only nearby town, I thought it prudent to hang around town a few days just to make sure I didn't have an infection. This gave me a chance to catch up on some work and produce my Sedona episode while things were still fresh in my mind. I was stealth camping, mostly parking on the street downtown, but then I discovered the Buffalo Park. It has a wide panoramic view of the snow-capped mountains and a 2-mile trail plus bathrooms. There were no restrictive signs, so I stayed there, and I was the only one doing so. I don't like being so obvious, but whenever I looked out the window behind my silver mylar window coverings, I saw nobody else. And this actually worked out quite well. Plus, I was able to flush out my toilet bucket in the morning. A definite plus. I'm sure the staff at Planet Fitness wonders about me. I show up each day simply to bathe. I like being able to really clean my wound and see it in the mirror up close, and I can see that I'm healing fine. And good news, I get an email from Susie Blackshaw, whom I've connected with because of this podcast. She and her husband Scott are also in the Sedona area, and we decided to meet in person. They have found an outstanding boondocking site on the Cococino National Forest Road 237, and they've offered me a nice dinner and company. I'm excited. But I'm also confused. On my official National Forest map, the road they're on says it doesn't allow overnight camping. But Susie emails me back that 237 not only allows camping, but it's also very clearly marked as to which campsites are available in 4 distinct areas. When I get down there, I like how Forest Road 237, as well as all the forest roads, are so clearly marked ahead of time on the highway. I have not found that always to be the case in some states. The road itself is bumpy dirt and rocks, and I go slowly, and Sophie does just fine. The Blackshaws are in the 4th section, perhaps a mile down the road. It may be a little closer, but when you're driving this slowly, it's really hard to gauge distance. And indeed, each of the 4 sections are very clearly signed, as are the individual campsites within each circular drive section. I've never seen a national forest this organized with camping before, for dispersed campsites. It's rather nice, and the landscape itself is quite nice. We are camping in a Ponderosa Forest on the Colorado Plateau, the most extensive Ponderosa Forest in the world. These pines are adapted to regularly low-intensity forest fires with their thick fire-resistant bark and no lower branches. The Hopi used them to make ladders and roofs, and the Navajo used the east side of the tree to make cradle boards. Under the trees, some charming wildflowers are starting to emerge. Spring is here. Even though we've never met, it's like meeting old friends, but they have an advantage. As listeners of the podcast, they actually know me pretty well, so I have lots more questions to ask them. They've been on the road full-time for a year and a half, and I learned lots of tips from them. In fact, Susie's writing a book on boondocking, which is all about free camping. I can't wait to read it, and we'll be sure to let you know when it's released. We have a delightful evening exchanging stories and getting to know each other, and I feel like I've once again found kindred spirits because of this podcast. It's what brings me the greatest joy and is the primary motivator for me to keep working on the show. We may cross paths again in the next month or so as we explore this section of the country, and I hope that we do. I wake up early and head for Walnut Canyon National Monument. It's very close to Flagstaff, and I worry it's going to be crowded, so I want to be among the first to get in when it opens. A National Parks Pass will get me into Walnut Canyon, plus any of the national monuments, all for free under the same pass. It's still below freezing, so I decide not to change out of my woolies and sweats until I get there. A cold front has come through, and the next few days will dip into the upper 20s, even though it's the middle of April. I haven't been cold in the sofa yet, even though I still haven't found the loose wire on the heater that's making the thermostat not work, so that I could add a little heat if I wanted to. I'm really grateful that the build-out guy did such a nice job insulating her. More than 800 years ago, sheltered by the overhanging cliffs, the Walnut Canyon was once inhabited by the Sinaguas, which in Spanish means without water. Out here in the high desert, water is a premium commodity and means life versus death. They lived here for about a century before migrating to assimilate with the nearby larger Hopi communities. These ancient people learned to capture the seasonal water and snowmelts in clay jugs and figured out how to survive in this rugged environment, which from the plateau at around 7,000 feet to about 400 below down in the bottom of the canyon is comprised of 5 ecosystems. The Sinaguans created shelter from the natural erosion of the limestone mountainside, which created sideways C-shaped caves. This limestone is the same Kaibab formation found in the Grand Canyon and down in Sedona. A mere 250 million years ago, this calcium carbonate was formed by the sea. Yep, this soil was once the ocean, and northern Arizona once held beachfront property. So what remains now is harder limestone overhanging the eroded section of the softer layers. Taking advantage of this natural erosion, signs tell me that was the women. They are the ones who made the interior and exterior walls and mortared them together with clay. In Walnut Canyon, there was once about 300 such rooms, some used for storage of food, water, and tools. Unfortunately, in the late 1800s, it was considered cool to come here to dig up relics, so much of the surviving household artifacts were removed. In 1915, the president proclaimed Walnut Canyon a national monument, which finally protected the site. On the 1-mile island trail, named for the path that walks around a peninsula spit of land that just juts out into the canyon, you can inspect many remnants of these homes. Round trip, the trail itself has 736 steps with a 370-foot elevation change, and the path is paved. Most of it has a handrail. For food, the Sinaguans foraged the plants in the area and ate mostly rabbits and deer for protein. On the flat plateau above their housing, they built many patches for crops like corn, beans, and squash. At least the men were the ones doing the planting. These people migrated away from the area around 1250, joining and assimilating with larger Hopi communities. Ancestors still come by to pay respects and leave tokens. There's a sunny side and a shady side to the island, and I wouldn't be surprised if they move shelters depending on the season. The National Park Service has done a nice job with both historical and floral signage throughout the monument. I'm especially interested in how they use the native plants for food and medicine, and I learned that the blooming hedgehog cacti, aka Echinocereus triglycerideus. If you're wondering how I can pronounce that, but generally butcher most other unusual names, it's because I used to have a wholesale plant nursery, so my tongue got used to Latin. One of the most important plants is the banana yucca, Yucca baccata. Instead of the synthetic materials that we use today, native peoples use parts of this plant to make rope and twine. You can even break off the spine tip of a leaf and then pull down the strong stringy fiber to make a ready-to-go needle and thread. From the leaves of this plant, they also made floor mats, baskets, paintbrushes, sandals, soap and shampoo, and even hairbrushes. When it flowers, they feasted on the petals, and then they dried the fruit for lean times. This plant ranks in the top 10 of the most uses by all native peoples. Another important plant is the two-needle pinyon. The high-protein seeds of these pinyon pines could mean survival or starvation. I've never heard of such a slow-growing plant, though. It takes 25 years for the tree to produce cones, and then another 50 years for it to produce viable seeds. In addition to the seeds, the sap was used to waterproof baskets and to soothe irritated skin. I'll try not to bore you with plants, but there's just one other important local tree, the Utah juniper. This tree is revered for its medicinal properties to treat colds, headaches, stomach problems, and spider bites. The berries are edible and currently and abundantly litter the ground. The bark was used to make cordage, matting, and roofs. When I look out at this harsh, dry landscape, I wonder how anybody would ever survive here, and I'm struck that actually all around me are the means to do so. There's also a short plateau trail called the Rim Trail that has a scenic overlook, plus you can see how and where the Sinaguans created agricultural plots and pits. The landscape, though rugged, is beautiful, and the sunny sides of the canyon walls are bedecked with completely different plants than the shadier side. One thing that struck me is how the changing direction of the wind of the millennium carves lines in the exposed rock. It's cool and beautiful, and I'll put some photos on the website. One of the monument volunteers and I are chatting, and he tells me on the opposite side of the Arizona Trail parking lot, just outside the entrance to this canyon, is National Forest, and I can boondock there. I have enough water and food to do so, so I decided that's where I'm going to sleep tonight. The site I chose, and there are many along this long dirt and rock road, is not as pretty as last night's, but it's going to be cold, so I think that maybe I'm going to appreciate this extra sunshine in these smaller juniper trees up on the Colorado Plateau. In the morning, I cross over the highway a few miles back to my Planet Fitness for one last shower in Flagstaff, at least for a couple of days, and I restock my groceries. I top off the gas and even refill all my water storage tanks. I'm ready to rock and roll for several days at least without any amenities. However, it's a Saturday and every place is going to be packed, so I decided to take advantage of good cell service for one more night in Flagstaff, and then I'll return to Sunset Crater when it opens in the morning. I figure I'll be able to snag a dispersed campsite from someone who needs to head home for work. And then on Monday, I can hit the Grand Canyon with hopefully less crowds. I mentioned the Arizona Trail. also known as the Arizona Scenic Trail. This long-distance trail runs 800 miles from Utah all the way down to the Mexican border. You can hike, bike, or horseback ride it. There are 22 trail towns for resupply. If you're interested in doing some or all of this trail, there's a comprehensive planning book called Your Complete Guide to the Arizona National Scenic Trail. This book can help you plan your trip, learn where water supplies are, and all about the flora and fauna you'll see. In our Hiking the Grand Canyon episode, Mary mentions that the AZT trail goes right through the canyon and folks have to carry their bikes. It's crazy. In fact, I ended up camping just outside the AZT in Cathedral Forest, about a half mile from the park. Boondocking means, once again, that I'm camping for free. There are no amenities, and I'm glad that I brought lots of water because it's still considered winter up here. All the water resupply sources are closed. But before I headed up to the Grand Canyon, I first returned to Sunset Crater to finish the trails I didn't get a chance to hike when I fell and hurt my elbow last week. I arrived at sunset before it opened, and since I didn't have a gate up, I was able to walk the trails virtually by myself. This, I have found, is the secret to avoiding the outdoor crowds these days. Get there early. From Sunset, I headed north to see the Pueblo's Abupatki National Monument. I am struck once again how people can actually live in this harsh environment. There's rarely any water, so not only does it mean storing and also hauling water from miles and miles away, there's also so little vegetation and hardly any critters to eat that I could see. Yet people lived here 800 years ago for around 100 years before moving on. It's amazing. I'd be lucky to survive a few days without supplies here. Tired from hiking and driving around, when I reached the Grand Canyon, I decided to begin exploring tomorrow and head to nab a campsite. Booking an established campsite last minute is virtually impossible. Ditto with the lodging down at Phantom Ranch. The first come first served campground hasn't even opened for the season yet, nor for that matter has even the North Rim entrance. The East entrance just opened last week. The only year-round entrance is the South Rim. I've been using the iOverlander app that Susie was raving about, and I quickly understood the appeal. I find a forest road just outside the national park, and so I head there. The road is unpaved and quite lumpy, so I'm glad I only have to drive in about a mile total. Since I entered this dirt road from within the park, there's no camping at first, but once I leave the park boundaries, I'm back in the Kaibab National Forest, and there are many roads I can set up camp. I'm tucked under the pine trees, and in the morning it takes me about 30 minutes to get to where I plan to park for the day. My plan is to hike the Rim Trail, and then come up with a plan for the rest of the week. I'm at the parking lot by 8 a.m., and there's still loads of spaces. In fact, later that afternoon when I returned, I was surprised the lot wasn't completely full. That kind of surprised me. It won't be long this season before it's completely packed. Naturally, most of the people are wandering near parking lots as I walk the 12-mile trail. Congestion picks up dramatically around lunchtime when people start arriving from Flagstaff and other population centers. This is my third time to the Grand Canyon. There's a haze on the other side caused by pollution as well as sand in the air. One sign says some of the pollution can come far away as Asia. Prescribed burns and our own emissions also contribute, of course, as well as all the dust we kick up from as little as hiking, but a lot of the ATVs and just riding on the desert destroys that crust that we learned about on the Sedona episode where they say don't bust the crust. That crust is this little bubbly microbiological fungi licheny stuff that helps keep the topsoil from blowing away, as well as when it does rain, it absorbs that water like a sponge. And so it's critically important if you're out in the desert that you stick to the roads, the trails, walk on the slide rock, what I call bedrock, what they call slide rock out here, or where the water does the wash because it can't grow there. Otherwise, you're really, really hurt in the desert. It can take 30 to 50 years for that stuff to grow. And I just see people trampling all over it, and it's just very sad. When I was here last time, I don't remember the haze. And another one of the guides says, too, when he was here 20 years ago, you did not have this haze across the Grand Canyon. And I'm sure a lot of this dust and the air pollution is causing that. And it's kind of sad. It's nice and crisp when you're up close, but the far side is a bit hazy. Up on the rim, I see lots of people taking selfies right on the cliff edges, and I wouldn't be surprised if they have a few deaths by selfies here each year. At one overlook, I even see a dropped cell phone down below. I find it amusing, like at the Wapataki Monument, some places the Grand Canyon closed the interpretive centers of the visitor centers, but have kept open the gift shops during COVID. It seems like the risk would be the same for both, but again, what do I know? I enjoy my hike and get back to my campsite, where I have an unbelievable 4 bars of cell service. In fact, I text my sister, I have 4 bars. And she's like, I have never heard of a campsite with 4 bars. She thought like 4 liquor bars. And I was like, no, I was so excited to have cell service because I hardly ever have it. So it was a great place to finally get caught up in some things. I think I'm going to hang out in the Grand Canyon a little bit longer than I thought because of this, but my limiting factor will be the water. In order to beat the Grand Canyon crowds and make sure I get a parking place for Sophie, I get everything ready the night before, then head out at dawn. I get a special treat just as I get close to the main road from my dispersed camping site. There's a mountain lion up ahead. At first, I can't believe my eyes as seeing one is so rare, but there was a sign I'd seen earlier on the highway about mountain lion crossing, and they do warn you not to hike solo on the back trails because of them. I see her again, and I'm sure. She's huge, and she's running not so fast that she's trying to catch prey. I think I'm the one that scared her with my van. I'm absolutely thrilled. A little further ahead, I see a deer, which often means there are others I don't see. And then the icing on the cake, I see 3 female elks wander slowly across the road in front of my car. They pay it absolutely no mind whatsoever. This day is off to a great start, and I hope the canyon hike is successful as well. I get a reasonably close parking spot, then make my breakfast before heading out on the trail. The plan is to hike 3 miles down the super steep Bright Angel Trail. I think it's got a couple 1,000-foot elevation gain and loss in that short 3 miles. So even though I'm only going to be hiking 6 miles today, I'm certainly going to feel it. And I'm going to be glad to be on the trail early for 3 reasons. 1, far less crowds. This is the most popular canyon trail, at least down to the 1.5-mile restroom. And then 2, it's going to be cooler as the temperatures have been around freezing at night. I'll start off with my puffy jacket, but it's not going to take long for me to be peeling that off. And unexpectedly, number 3, until that sun's directly overhead, the trail's often in the shade. Something that's not mentioned in the write-up of this trail, but it's something I'm definitely grateful for. Folks on the trail are in great spirits and they're very friendly, although many miss the memo that hikers going uphill have the right of way. So do the mule teams, and I'm surprised at how fast these guys travel. I got a good head start on one group of them, but they passed me after about 2 miles. I have a cool video of them I'll share. Around 8:30 or 9 o'clock, I start crossing the paths of the backpackers that have hiked down to the river yesterday. With few exceptions, they look like tired puppies. This canyon will drain you. I believe there are sections closer to the river that are somewhat flat, but at least for the section that I'm doing today, the elevation change is unrelenting. To be on the safe side, since I knew it was going to be steep, I wore my heavy-duty knee braces for extra support, and I'm glad that I did. When I finished, all my body parts felt fine. I brought way too many snacks, and fortunately for at least one couple, I brought too much water, because the 2 bathroom waters still shut off for the season, and they didn't have notice up at the trailhead. The ranger said there was one, but it must have blown off, or who knows what happened to it. I had read that that was a possibility, so that's why I carried 4 liters today, and I was glad that I did, because the folks from Wisconsin that I met midway down had not brought enough, and I was glad to be able to share. When I stopped for my break, I was disappointed when I dropped my Nutella peanut butter wrap, so I ended up eating a payday bar as a substitute. I hardly eat processed food, but when I'm doing a serious hike, I stock up on it. The quick carbs help give you a boost of energy. I'm also now a fan of Grand Canyon Mary's Jolly Rogers to help keep my mouth moist. And thanks to Mary for that tip. There was more haze today across the canyon than there was yesterday, but seeing the cliffs from this different perspective was still so worth it. The light was naturally better earlier in the morning, so I took my pictures on the way down. I could have used the brakes more often on the way up, but once that sun gets bright, it tends to wash out landscape photos. And as it is, cameras just don't capture landscapes the way you see them. Or at least I can't seem to do it. I got lucky on my way up and glomped onto 2 gals, Kim and Michelle from Louisiana. They've known each other since school days and have reconnected recently now that the kids are grown. So once a year they go on an adventure together, and I think that's so cool. Like I hear in so many of my emails, the husbands don't want to adventure travel, so now the women are simply doing it on their own, with their hubby's blessings, of course. This would be the same thing if my Bill were still alive. As long as I didn't try to make him do it, and I found somebody else to go with me, he'd be cool with it. He would not be cool with me traveling solo right now, but that's where I am in my life, and I just don't think I should be waiting around in case my body gives out, or what happens if I never find somebody. The next hike I did was on another corridor trail, the South Kaibab. The map is deceiving. It looked like it wasn't going to be as steep as the Bright Angel, But looking back, it's because it's so steep that the scale of the map couldn't fit all those switchbacks in, so it looks like a fairly straight line down. Definitely not. Parking for this trail is difficult, so I got up at first light and headed there, figuring I'd secure a spot and then have my breakfast. There's not a parking lot, but you can take a shuttle from the village, but I figured I could park in the nearby picnic area that had about 8 spots I'd noticed the day before. But by dawn, these were all taken, and I'll bet you they spent the night there. I didn't see any signs prohibiting this, although I bet you it's discouraged. I ended up parking at a viewpoint pullout about a mile away and hiking down the rim trail over to the South Kaibab Trail. Right as I was starting down, I met Brandy, a traveling nurse out exploring the Southwest in between her contracts. We ended up hiking and supporting each other the entire trail. The plan was to hike down to Skeleton Key, 3 miles down the canyon. I know 3 miles, like yesterday, doesn't sound like a lot, but when it's virtually straight down, which of course means it's going to be straight up returning up the trailhead, it's a challenging hike. Most visitors hike down to just the ooh-ah point, which is about a half a mile down, or if they want to go a little further down to Cedar Ridge, which is about 1.5 miles down. I was so surprised that the South Canyon views were completely different on this trail than on the Bright Angel. I thought I'd taken enough photos on the last hike, but I realized, nope, I had not. The canyon walls look completely different, but I also think there's a lot more green, which I'm guessing is spring is trying to make its approach. There's no water on the South Kaibab, so you got to bring a whole lot. I carried about 3 liters, a little less than the hike I did yesterday because it's going to be cooler and I'm starting even earlier. Remember, water weighs 8 pounds a gallon, so you want to make sure you bring enough, but not so much that you're carrying extra weight. I also brought an assortment of snacks to keep my energy up and my electrolytes in balance. This trail is less crowded than Bright Angel, probably because it requires more work to get here. I learned my lesson, and on the way back up, I seriously slowed down my pace so I wouldn't get out of breath like I did on Bright Angel. Warren Doyle, head of the Appalachian Trail Institute, had advised me once that you should only hike as fast as you can carry on a conversation. A Grand Canyon Park ranger reiterated similar advice when Brandy and I stopped for a break at Cedar Ridge and chatting with 3 of the rangers there. One said, "Count your breath, not your steps," which is basically the same advice as Warren's. Doing so made a huge difference in how I felt after the hike. I was not completely fried. On Bright Angel, I was so pooped I needed a nice long nap. After South Kaibab, I felt fine, and I ended up getting some work done afterwards. I'm going to try to heed this advice in the future because it really did make a difference in how my body felt. Brandy and I wanted to be back at the trailhead by noon because rain was in the forecast with possible thunderstorms, and we wanted to make sure we were not in that canyon with a thunderstorm. And it turns out we made it back just in time as big blops of rain started hitting our windshield as we pulled out. In fact, once I was safely tucked in the van, the rain switched to a puffy hail that actually stuck to the ground for about 20 minutes or so. I've been at the Grand Canyon for almost a week. As you recall, I'd planned to pay for showers at the public area, but they're closed due to COVID. So after all the exercise and just general living for the last 5 days, the baby wipes just weren't cutting it anymore. I don't know why it took me so long to figure this out, but I said to myself, why don't you just heat up a pot of water and take a proper washcloth bath? Brilliant. I felt like a new woman, or at least a new woman with still dirty hair. I guess it took me so long to figure out how to do this because I don't have such long interludes between showers most of the time. On my last full day at the canyon, I decided to try out my injured shoulder and go biking on the nice long greenway path. You can bike on most of the paved paths in the park, including the rim trail. The only places I could see that bikes were not allowed or in the congested areas near the village. There's a nice greenway tucked in the woods across that main highway there. So it was a glorious ride in perfect high 60 degrees sunny weather. I did notice that the land here on the south rim seems to tilt west. So if you plan on a long bike ride, keep that in mind. If you start off heading west, remember that you're going to have a gentle climb back east to your starting point. I'm happy to report that my shoulder had 0 issues biking. It's been 5 weeks since I fell on my bike, and I'd have to say I'm up to about maybe 75% usage. It's now only hurting when I raise my arm too high and when I sleep. All in all, a definite improvement. I've thoroughly enjoyed my adventures in the Grand Canyon, but I have to backtrack and head to Prescott Valley again to get my second shot. In the next states I'm heading to, Utah and Colorado, they don't allow non-residents to get shots like Arizona does. And Prescott, even though it's 130 miles south, it seems to be the only place I can get the second Pfizer shot that I need. The good news is that means I get to see Jenny again. But first, I'm going to check into a hotel where I can take a tub and take a shower. My first proper one in a week. Planet Fitness shower was just not going to cut it this time. The next day, Jenny and I explored Montezuma's Well, a natural sinkhole that has a year-round spring plus some limestone cave dwellings along the side. And then we checked out Montezuma's Castle, a huge Puebloan remnant of a civilization of a couple thousand people that had lived in these cave dwellings along the cliff. After a quick grilled chicken burrito for lunch, we tackled a bit of the Red Canyon Trail before I had to head south for my shot. I went ahead to Page, Arizona next, but I'm tired, so I decided after my shot just to head north about 30 some odd miles, and I found the prettiest dispersed campsite I've used so far, just opposite the Sedona exit. I'm on a bluff surrounded by big sky view of mesas, and stunning, and I can't believe that I can stay here for free. Sadly, a front's going to be coming through tonight, so I don't get to witness what I'm sure is a regular striking sunset and sunrises from this wide open vista. In fact, it's snowing in Flagstaff tonight. Being lower down, I miss all that. Jenny emails me in the morning that the snow is over and the roads are good. I wanted to spend another day just enjoying the view, but I'm pretty sure that Sprint T-Mobile has throttled my unlimited data because even though I have 3 bars, my service is interminably slow. With regret, I decided to head towards Flagstaff and Page. So far the weather is fine, but then it turns to rain and then hail. I'm glad Sophie is getting a bath and erasing all the red and tan dust, but then it turns to snow, and then a lot of snow. I haven't driven this kind of heavy snowfall since the 1980s. Apparently the snow from Flagstaff is heading south. I'm even driving behind a snowplow scraping the right lane. Fortunately, even though we're all driving slowly, especially after several cars had spun off the roads have a pretty good grip. I'm glad to finally reach Flagstaff, where indeed the snow has stopped and the roads are now completely clear. After a quick fluid top-off for Sophie, I decided to head towards Page, where I plan to hike some of the incredible canyons I've heard about and Jenny's recommended. The word of the day is erosion. Arizona is a geologist's dream. Because of the desert, there aren't a lot of plants camouflaging the many layers of rocks and dirt. In the Grand Canyon, you can literally see a couple billion years of assorted layers. I forgot to mention an interesting Grand Canyon factoid. There are 2 periods where the soil completely vanishes, and one of these periods is over 1 billion years where the soil is just gone. They can tell that the age difference between the 2 layers is over 1 billion years difference, and it just kind of, I don't know, a seed washed away? I never was quite clear, but this anomaly is very, very intriguing to me. As I head north towards Page, I again enter the Painted Desert. I'd come part of this way when I went to the Grand Canyon via the east entrance, but then I went through the Painted Desert through the Sunset Crater and Mutaki areas. And frankly, that's a much more scenic drive than just the straightaway through. After I pass the turnoff to the Grand Canyon, though, the landscape changes once again, and you feel like you're on another planet. There are these big black mounds of maybe lava fields turned to sand as decomposed rock. I don't know if it's mining spoils. When I was first making my notes on this, I thought it was mining spoils. But now, looking back after I've spent the last couple of weeks in Utah, which I'll talk about in the next episode, I think these are decomposing mountains. It's very strange looking. And in the background, you see these magnificent high cliffs with massive boulders on top that seem like they're perched to fall at any moment. Of course, eventually erosion is going to make the ground underneath less stable and able to carry the weight, and so these rocks will tumble. But here's where it gets really interesting. Because these boulders are so huge, the weight often compresses the soil it plummets on top of, hardening that particular patch of soil. And then that big boulder protects this underlying newly squished hardened soil from some of the wind, snow, and rain. And so what happens is, over the gazillions of years, these big boulders end up sitting perched atop the slowly winnowing base-like columns, making it look like a toadstool. Of course, over time, the toadstools are going to collapse, but in the meantime, they are so cool. Jenny has recommended several hikes that I might enjoy and suggested I camp at Lee's Ferry Campground. And so I see that everywhere I want to go is by the Vermilion Cliffs National Monument, an area I'm going to see right before I hit Page. Luckily, I make it to the only campground shortly before lunch and snag one of the few remaining campsites. There are some boondocking sites maybe 10 miles away, but I'm glad I'm going to be closer to the trailheads. It's also nice to have a bathroom and fresh water, even if there's no shower. The site comes with a picnic table, but also an overhead shelter to block the sun. Some sites are even able to see the Colorado River down below. Mine faces the cliffs, which is nice. There are no trees here, so you only want to come here in the fall through spring, as I imagine you're just going to boil in the summer. Today, since it's midday, I decided just to do the 3 short and easy hikes nearby. One down to the river, one by the river, and one to the old homestead. Lee's Ferry is where folks rafting the Grand Canyon put in. It's one of the few places you can get a vehicle close enough to the river. Looking at all the gear the rafters haul, I can't imagine them setting up without some kind of road access. Once they put in, they've got around 250 miles before they can get out of the canyon. There is no turning back. Kayakers are paddling in the still water ahead of the put-out area, and I watch them as I hike the river trail. Along this trail, you see remnants of old gold mining, apparently unsuccessful, and the abandoned equipment litters parts of the trail. Since this is the safest place to cross the Colorado River, in the 1800s and 1900s, it made a natural route between Utah and Arizona, and was an important stop in westward expansion. Jacob Hamblin, an emissary of the Jesus Christ Latter-day Saints, the Mormons, realized the potential of this particular junction, and he recommended that the church establish a river crossing. 3 families, including the lease for which the ferry was named, were sent to homestead the area in 1872. The homesteaders managed to harness the river for irrigation and actually built quite a nice orchard and a nice assortment of fruit trees, had a nice garden, and several nice outbuildings. Lee, it turns out, was a fugitive from the 1857 Mountain Meadows Massacre, and the law eventually caught up with him and he was executed. His wife carried on with the ferry with additional help from other church missionaries. The next day I got an early start. I wanted to tackle the challenging Spencer Trail before it got too hot. This trail was built in 1910 as a mule trail to haul coal from 30 miles away. Today, it's a super steep 2.2 vertical climb to a view overlooking the Colorado River and the Paria River. You have to climb about 1,500 feet in just a mile. I learned from my Grand Canyon hikes. I took a lot more breaks than normal. This not only helped me to keep my heart rate down, but I was hoping I'd also have the energy to hike Cathedral Wash afterwards. I tend to hike fairly fast, particularly uphill. It's a downhill where I tend to go a little bit more cautiously. And like in the Grand Canyon, today I also wore my heavy-duty knee braces for added support. Because this mountain is so high, I was actually hiking in the shade, and it looked like I'd make it to the top before the sun peeked over, which pleased me as it seemed to be much warmer than the day before. Down below, and at this point I'm close to maybe a half a mile higher than the river below, I see boaters and rafters getting ready to brave the Colorado. Here, the Paria River is scrawny, and I find it hard to believe that it carved that beautiful slot canyon that Jenny and Paul will be hiking sometime later today. She showed me the pictures of her earlier hike. The section they're doing is so popular, it requires a really hard-to-get permit. When I was maybe 50 feet from the top, I paused. Yes, I've been doing several rock scrambles on this trail, but always I could tell kind of where the trail is supposed to go, even if it's not blazed anyhow. But up ahead, there was a weird jumble of rocks that just didn't look normal to me. They didn't look stable. There was nobody else on the trail. I hadn't passed anybody the whole morning, and a sign at the beginning of the trail warned that the trail was not maintained. So to me, this rock didn't look like a stable rock scramble. It looked like a rock fall, and I didn't trust that these rocks were going to stay put. There's a fair amount of exposure on this trail, and remember, exposure means that if you fall over the edge, chances are you're going to get hurt and possibly even worse. It wasn't scary because most of the time the trail is like at least 24 to 30 inches wide. But I just felt really uncomfortable. I did not like the looks of this upcoming section. It just didn't look right. So even though I was so close to the top, I just decided, be smart. So I called it a hike and I turned around. I would rather climb a lot more mountains, and I'm determined not to let my ego or ambitions or I got to check this box or do something else stupid that might prevent me from doing that. On the way down, I passed a couple solo guys with foreign accents and a young couple, and that's it for the entire trail. And I was older than any 2 I passed put together. I just had a feeling that my gray hairs made me call the hike, and I wondered if their youthful exuberance would cause them to come to a different decision. I was back at Sophie by 10:30, and after refilling all my water, I decided I had the energy to go hike Cathedral Wash. I figured I could do the moderately rated 3-mile trail in about 2 hours. Cathedral Wash, I come to find out, is a wash that picks up steam as it meanders to the Colorado River. It doesn't look like much when you start the hike by walking under the highway towards the river, but within 100 feet, you simply go, wow. I am going to love this hike. I'm surrounded by jutting rocks. Most of the time, the canyon's about maybe 20 to 50 feet wide, but there are a few places where it's only wide enough for your body to pass through. This is one of the prettiest hikes I've ever done. The trail is simply the wash. which means it's just where the rain and the snowmelt goes as the water works its way over to the Colorado River. There's no blazes telling you whether to walk here or rock scramble there, so it requires thinking and a willingness to backtrack if you believe the next section looks a little too dicey, or maybe you should take a different route, and so there is some judgment call to this trail. It also requires excellent gripping shoes because you're often on rock scrambles, and the falls can be quite steep in places. I'm glad I brought my poles as they gave me an extra touch point, although there are a few times I ended up having to toss them ahead so I could grab hold just with my hands. I was happy to see there are other people my age for a change on this hike. Since it's later in the morning, they were all heading back in. All are warning me about a particularly dicey area up ahead where the drop is, depending on who I spoke with, anywhere between 30 and 60 feet down. Everyone I met turned around there. I tell them I'll probably use the same good judgment. I keep thinking that I have enough photos of rocks, but I can't help myself and continue to take more. I feel like I'm in a cathedral, and I just can't help feeling that I'm in a sacred place. I come to a big dip where, if there was water, it would plunge down below. It looks a little twitchy, but certainly not any 30 to 60 foot drop. I tell myself as I finagle my way through there that that wasn't so bad. Around the bend, I see the real dip people have been telling me about. Yep, it's fallen down at least 30 feet. A misstep and you hit your head and you're seriously hurt or dead. But with really careful steps, I climb the right side of the gulch and find a nice shady nook, and I decide to break for lunch. It's actually pretty cool in the shade and I enjoy my mini meal. Like the others though, I decide, be prudent, and I call it a hike at this point. It's not worth the risk. Plus, since most people hike deserts in the morning, if I did fall and needed some help, I might be possibly stuck here overnight because everybody's pretty much done hiking for the day. Simply wasn't worth it. If yesterday's word of the day was erosion, today's word is prudence. 2 hikes, both called when I was close to the finish line, but prudence dictated that I turn back. I regret neither choice. Most hikes I've called have been due to weather. One horribly windy day in Maine when Jane and I skipped Wildcat Pass and took a ski lift down. Without the wind, I'd have been okay hiking that skinny exposed pass, but with a 35-pound backpack that might catch the wind and toss me overboard, no thank you. Jane and I also called a backpacking trip in the White Mountains of New Hampshire. The weather was so bad and the fog so thick, we wouldn't have been able to see anything if we climbed up to that Franconia notch we're heading to. You climb for the view. We literally had to bump into the building at the top of Mount Washington because the fog was so thick we wouldn't have seen it unless we hit it. I also skipped a seriously remote section of the West Highland Way because the weather was so bad, if I got lost, no matter how unlikely that was, I would die of exposure. So I think until today, my called hikes, like I said, I think have been due to inclement weather, making them unsafe. Both of today's hike I called strictly for safety reasons, having nothing to do with the weather. I just simply didn't like the risk and reward ratio. When I got back to Sophie, there was a note on the windshield. It was from Jenny and Paul. They noticed Sophie on their way to the Paria Canyon and wrote to say hi. When I made it back to camp, I had burned so many calories I ate a second lunch. I'm glad Jenny recommended I visit Lee's Ferry area. I wouldn't have known to come here without her recommendation. Ditto the land between the lakes that Jane told me about. You know how I'm always saying I don't like to plan trips? I think I figured out what I mean by that. Because people are like, I don't understand. You do a travel podcast. When I'm doing an interview for the show about a destination I don't know, I probably spend 2 or 3 hours researching the destination before we record, so I have a good idea what the adventure entails. I know kind of what questions to ask. I love doing that. What I don't like doing is the actual planning of an itinerary for a trip. I don't like figuring out the logistics. I don't like figuring out the lodging or the airlines and bus and train tickets and all that. That's why I just usually push the buy button for adventure travel, because I don't want to mess with figuring out what the best way is to do all this. I want somebody who already knows all about it to figure it out for me. Plus, when I do these tours, I get to meet some cool people, and I'm with a group as well. Between Jenny has told me, as well as the park rangers at the Grand Canyon, I have plenty to see and do the next week or so, and I'm excited. I decided to get up super early to see the sun hit the red rocks. It's a magical sight, but you have to get up super early this time of year. Arizona doesn't do daylight savings time, so it gets light around 5 o'clock in the morning. Sunrise right now is around 5:30. And you get a little bit extra time because it takes a while for that sun to come up over the mountains. But when it does, it lights up that red rock like nothing you've ever seen before. It's worth losing a little sleep over. My drive to Horseshoe Bend is an overall treat, as I have the Vermilion Cliffs lit up on my left side for most of the way. I arrive at Horseshoe by 7 a.m. There's a parking fee and then about a 20-minute walk to the famous horseshoe-shaped canyon of the Colorado River. I'm upriver of the Grand Canyon rafting trips, but you're able to rent a kayak and kayak this 1,000-foot high canyon in nearby Page. The water's super calm down there, at least it looks like it. And because I get there so early, much of the canyon is still in shade. So if you want to see it all lit up, you want to get there late morning. I like the time I got there though, because it's a heck of a lot cooler to get there at daybreak or day end. The middle of the day, you're going to roast. I resupply in Page and then hike the Hanging Garden Trail plus the adjacent Viewpoint Hill. It's not even 8 a.m. and already it's getting hot. I'm wondering if I'm going to be too late in the season for Utah. I've learned that campgrounds are pretty full, especially in the weekends. It's peak season in this area. I decided to try my luck at Page's Beehive Campground, right by the Glen Canyon Dam. I'm in luck and snagged the last of 6 campsites. You can stay up to 3 days, and I pay the entrance self-pay station for Friday and Saturday night, so I know I'll have a place to park Sophie for the weekend. Plus, I have cell service here, so I'll just get some work done during the day and hike the hills in the morning. I've had a fantastic time in northern Arizona, but now it's time to head north to Utah. And we'll do that on the next Sophie Diaries on the 3rd Thursday of June. I hope you're enjoying the Sophie Diaries. Drop me a line at kid@activetraveladventures.com and let me know. And also, while I've got your ear, I have got an issue with Amazon that I'm not getting enough quote-unquote affiliate sales. So if you would do me the honor, if you're getting any value from this program at all, if you would please use my link, any link at all at activetraveladventures.com/Amazon. And anytime you're going to buy something from Amazon, if you'll go through that page, bookmark that page, it would be a big help because I have to have a variety. Otherwise, they'll discontinue my account and then I'll have to go back and reapply after a certain period of time. They'll avoid all the links I've already set up and I'll have to go back and redo everything I've done on the website. It's going to be such a pain. They only generally don't pay a whole lot, but I really don't want to go back and do that. And I would be most grateful if you would please remember me next time you're going to Amazon and go to activetraveladventures.com/Amazon. Click on any picture on that page. It'll send you to the Amazon website via my portal. And buy whatever you're going to buy from that link. It doesn't make a difference if you click on my hiking pants but end up buying some books or a kiddie pool for the kids or something. It makes no difference. Amazon just counts the access point. So please, if you would, again, that's activetraveladventures.com/Amazon. I would be forever grateful for that. It makes a big difference. I've got to try to figure out some way to cover the cost of this podcast. I love doing it, but now that I'm retired, I am feeling these subscription costs that I have to do security for the website, the web hosting, blah, 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 blah. I won't bore you with the details. Then I got to figure this thing out, and I'd appreciate your help. Like I said, if you're getting any value from it, this is a great no-cost way for you to help out and help keep the program ad-free. Thank you so much. I hope you've enjoyed the Sophie Diaries. Next month, we continue our exploration of the Southwest, and we will be focusing on one of my favorite states to explore and to hike in, Utah. Utah boasts some of the most amazing landscapes in the world. It feels like you're on another planet, and it changes so dramatically from 50 miles to 50 miles away. It's one of the few places I've ever desired and am actually going back to visit again. When there's so many places to see and do, Utah's got that much power, and I can't wait to share that with you. I really appreciate you listening. Until next time, this is Kid Parks. Adventure on!